Now we're going to talk about the second part of solving quadratic equations. There's a lot of different ways to solve quadratic equations, so I broke this up into two videos. The two ways we're going to talk about in this video are completing the square and the quadratic formula. So let's solve this quadratic equation by completing the square. This one can't be factored. There's no two numbers that multiply to -6 and add to -4. So we're going to need a different trick. The first step in this trick is going to be to get all the terms that have variables on one side and all the constant terms on the other. So I'm going to add 6 to each side. So I have x squared minus 4x on this side, and I'm going to leave a space. You'll see why in a second. And on the other side I have 6. So to complete the square, I have to take half of the coefficient of x, and then I need to square that, and I'm going to put that in a little space. So half of -4 is -2. So half of -4 is -2. And then I'm going to square -2, and that's 4. So I'm going to put 4 in the little space. And if I put 4 in the little space on one side, I have to add 4 to the other side, because you can't just add 4 to one side. You have to have balance. So what's happened on the left side, if I try to factor this, I have x and x. And numbers that multiply to 4 and add to -4 are -2 and -2. So you see I've made a perfect square on the left side, because I have x minus 2 times x minus 2. And on the right side, I have 10. So I'm going to write that as a perfect square. X minus 2 quantity squared, and that equals 10. Now what I can do is what I did in the last section. I can take the square root of each side. So the square root of that, and the square root of that. And the square root and the square cancel out, so I'm left with x minus 2 on the left. And I have plus or minus the square root of 10 on this side. Add 2 to each side. And your final answer for x is 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. The last method we're going to look at is using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula works for any quadratic equation, whether it's factorable or anything. As long as it's got a square in it, you're good. But the quadratic formula is kind of long and annoying. So if you can use one of the other ways, factoring or completing the square or something, that might be a good idea. But this formula will always work. So here's the formula. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what are a, b, and c? I have this quadratic equation in general form. That means it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So I have a squared term, a x term, and a constant term. And the number in front of x squared is a. In this case, there's no coefficient, but that means there's like a 1 there. So for this problem, a equals 1. The number in front of x is 5, so b equals 5. And c, the number all by itself, since it's subtracting 2, I'm going to make c minus 2. So let's put all those numbers in the formula. So x equals -5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times -2 all over 2 times 1. Now let's just go ahead and do the arithmetic. So x is going to equal -5 plus or minus the square root of 25. 4 times 1 times -2 is -8. So that's 25 minus -8 all over 2. So x equals -5 plus or minus the square root of, we'll make this adding the opposite, 33 over 2. You can't take the square root of 33, so that's the answer. In this last example, there's a little more work to do to find out what a, b, and c are. I need to move the 4x and the -2 over to the left to get it in general form. So this is 3x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. So a equals 3, b equals -4, and c equals 2. The quadratic formula again, -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x is going to equal the negative of -4, which is positive 4, plus or minus the square root of -4 squared, minus 4 times 3 times 2, all over 2a, or 2 times 3. So 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 minus 24, all over 6. Uh-oh, I'm starting to see a problem here. So x equals -4 plus or minus the square root of -8 over 6. Can you take the square root of a negative number? No. So this equation actually has no solution. And sometimes that happens. So that's it for solving quadratic equations.